This is the mystery Monoshock for the Tamiya Frog. This is something I picked up on eBay for very inexpensive. I think it was under $10. It was a unmarked, unlabeled, unbranded Monoshock. And by the looks of it, it looked kind of similar to what I've seen on the Parma Monoshocks. It's in that anodized blue color, but there are some interesting differences. So it was called part number 1231 suspension hop-up kit. It also came with the sort of an interesting rear sway bar. But let's have a look here. So at first glance, I think it's very similar to the Parma. But there's some interesting differences. The shape of the shock is definitely different, the sides. But the biggest thing is the mounting. So obviously, it's mounted with these little L brackets that go over the front of the suspension arms. And this is different because most of the other Monoshocks seem to have a little... They come with a top arm that has an additional little jut out here for the mounting of the Monoshock. But I thought this was kind of interesting, and maybe... I mean, maybe it looks cheaper, but it has an interesting benefit, which is it seems to add stability to the arms. So this is my setup now, and there's very little movement in there. It's nice and tight. Also, though, and I think this is kind of cool that it uses this bracket instead of replacing the top arm, because I've got the CRP arms, which have metal bushings on the insides of them. So they really ride... They're just very smooth on the stock Tamiya screws and hardware. And if I were to replace it with whatever came with the Monoshock, maybe it wouldn't be as smooth. But all of the play seems to be gone, and maybe partly because of this. I don't know if also it's causing some binding, and it was definitely difficult to dial it in. But let's see it move a little bit. The other thing we got going on here is there is a UG spring, because this was the original plan was to go in with these UG shock for the front, which I saw online in a lot of people's showrooms and stuff like that, and I thought it was got to be the coolest looking thing, even if it didn't work. Just love the design of it. So the springs that come from this kit, it comes with 2 springs to replace the stock Tamiya springs there. And when I tested them side by side, the UG springs were so much softer, which was, obviously the thing is that so many times the springs are too strong in the Tamiya stock configurations. So, and my initial idea was to take the stock springs and cut off a loop. And I did that, and I compared it against the UG springs, and they were still just so much smoother. So that's what we have in there is these UG springs from this kit. So that makes it definitely smoother and softer. And then we've got this little Monoshock. And it's filled with some of the yellow, which is a lighter oil. It's the stuff that came with the kit. It's a Frog kit. It's what's in the back of shocks. But I think maybe it needs something a little bit lighter. If you look right here, see what you think. Now, I'm still learning, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, whether this is a viable option for a frog to improve things. I expected this not to work at all. I used Teflon tape to wrap around the little brass fitting, and so far it's not leaking. I put little pieces of towel under here just to see overnight if it was going to drip or leak. And then also the inside of the shock is just really simple. And there's besides the screw-in piece, there's one washer and one little O-ring. And then the piston was like a simple little metal piece. But all in all, pretty solid. So something about the simplicity I thought was kind of cool. Now, assuming that it's not, the ride height isn't going to be an issue, or that maybe the lighter oil will help return it to a higher spot. But then again, maybe not. Maybe it's kind of good and smooth at this position. But as you can see, if it lifts up, you can see there it is at its full throw. Also, what I thought might be kind of interesting is that my understanding is that Monoshock's part of the problem is you also have the spring on here, so there's sort of nothing that keeps the car from rolling when it's when one side's picked up or the other. But in this case, you got the two springs still working internally, so I thought maybe they would provide some resistance. But if you pick it up, you can definitely see how one side transfers energy to the other side. But I thought maybe this could be an interesting happy medium. So for all those reasons, I'm going to give it a go. There's no play in the front. I'm pretty psyched about that. And it took a lot of fine-tuning to get it so it wasn't binding, but I think it's pretty smooth now. And then now it's about maybe setting up this shock and seeing if we can get it, this damper, see if we can tune it up. And the two ways I'm thinking are, I think the Teflon tape for sealing it off worked really well. I think maybe a lighter oil. The only other thing is there are a few spots in its throw where there's a little bit of a funny little binding, and I think that's because the O-ring has a little extra room to sort of like bang against its the edge, the little shelf that keeps it from going all the way in and then moving over here. So I think perhaps if we put a bigger O-ring in here or two O-rings, that would stop this little sort of strange binding that happens near the top. You can see it right there. It kind of loses its smoothness. I think that's the O-ring bouncing back and forth between the two little edges. But when it sits at its sort of the height at which it wants to return to, that's all pretty smooth. So anyway, this is it. This is going to be Mach 2 of my Riri Frog build using the mystery part 1231 suspension hop-up kit. And I got to wait for Mach 2. Eventually, somewhere down the road, I know I'm not going to be able to resist the Ampro front end for the Frog. But as far as I think using the stock, mostly stock front setup, I think this is kind of an interesting rig. And if you're going to have this sort of older looking suspension front end, I think the extra metal isn't a bad look. It's kind of fun. Kind of looks like a frog, like frog eyes. Anyway, so that's it. Thank you for watching.